Hey everybody, John Felt here, and with me is my friend Craig Edwards, and we are the Weatherwise guys, and we are going to talk about whatever is on our mind today. How you doing, Craig?
Well, a little soggy. Thank goodness I don't have a basement. There's been a lot of rain down here in South Florida from Tampa Bay south. Most of it has fallen in the Sarasota area, so we'll talk about that a little later.
How many? Most of the house? Do any houses have basements down in Central and South Florida? Or are they all on slab?
If there's a house with a basement here, I haven't found it. Everything's on concrete slab or it's a concrete block house. So all you see is concrete down here. So when they say pave paradise and put up a parking lot, that's what's going on in South Florida. So it's a
Is that
shame what's going on of all the. This used to be swampland, John, and now it's all concrete. So I hate to see what's going to happen if we keep building here and they're taking down all the green space. It's just ridiculous what's going on with the environmental consciousness down here in South Florida.
yeah, and that just causes more runoff and more flash flooding. You see that all over.
Yeah, and there's really no tributaries. There's Lake Okeechobee and then the Coolahatchee River, but some holding ponds that they make for the reserves around the communities. But as they dig up this ground to make communities, all you see is piles and piles of coral. Makes you wonder if this was underwater 10,000 years ago.
Yeah. Well, anyway, in today's briefing, we're going to talk whatever comes in our mind, so it might jump around a bit, and that's what we do a lot in our conversations. But I put this up here. This is, lots of the part of the nation had lots of severe storm activity in April, May. Matter of fact, it was the second most April, May tornadoes on record, and you can sort of see here how it jumped above average. This is sort of starting in April, and it went up above average, and this is where the severe storm activity was. I guess the thing that strikes me this year is, for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been talking about how the typical tornado alley, Texas, Oklahoma, maybe Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, it's been pretty quiet compared to other areas east and particularly southeast. And this year, the typical tornado alley got clobbered pretty classic. And this is the running average. You can sort of see we were running right close to average through middle of April, and then it really jumped up, and that's that active period we had, and we ended up with 1,179 tornadoes for the season so far. But it looks like it's quieting down a bit.
One thing I noticed about that map, John, is there hasn't been much going on in your neck of the woods up there in Missouri.
Now, we had a little excitement. We had a radar detected tornado warning, and you and I have talked about that a lot. Radar indicated tornadoes that a lot of times those are issued and they don't verify. Other times they do, but we had one here that came pretty close to my house, and man, I looked at it and it sure looked like it was had a rotation and everything, and it was an EF0. It did a little bit, but overall it was pretty quiet at my place up here in
When we
St.
first started
Louis.
our career, John, I didn't even have a radar. I worked at Milwaukee, and the radar came on a paper fax machine from Neenah, Wisconsin. So it was already about 5 minutes late by the time we got it to the office in Milwaukee. And we had no way to manipulate the radar and look at the storms. There's radar operator in Neenah. Then when I moved to Indianapolis, we had a 74 radar. What you had to do is a radar scope went around. It was like an old submarine black and white picture. You just circle the intensity of the radar returns, and then you put that on a paper overlay, and then you brought that out to the meteorologist at the warning desk. That was already 5 minutes old, so we're really much improved in the way of Doppler. And the thing that we didn't have when we were growing up is we didn't have an archive. There was no archive of the radar information, so you couldn't look back. Nowadays, they got archives, so you can play back in real time what you should have seen. I think that's what causing a lot of meteorologists to get a little bit trigger happy with tornado warnings, because you can go back and look and see a couplet and say, oh, you should issue a warning 5 minutes ago. So about 80%, 90% of the warnings we see are Doppler based on Doppler rotation.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, but I worked in Milwaukee for a short period of time. Billy Mitchell Field, if I remember right, isn't that the name of it? And the I do remember that you got this piece of paper, and it looked like a blob. It just looked like this. You're supposed to make decisions on this this is a radar. So it was sort of a mess back then, and it's so much nicer now.
I think if people were to look at that, says you were really issuing warnings based on that paper product coming to you.
I don't
So
think, I don't, I mean, I've talked about this before too. I don't think people necessarily expected us to verify, whereas now, if you don't hit a tornado warning, the pressures and the stakes are so much higher. Everybody expects you to hit every single one. So it's a lot different now
I
than it
remember
was.
when we were putting out our tornado warnings in our early in our career, we actually usually had to wait for a report of a tornado. And so when we first started issuing tornado warnings based on Doppler, the media would come to me and say, "Where was the tornado reported that you based your warning on?" I said, "Well, it wasn't reported. It was just possible on radar." I says, "It's a new generation of forecasting tornadoes. We learned that the first place that got struck by a tornado would like to have a tornado warning instead of waiting for somebody to get struck and then issue a tornado warning for downstream areas." So we've come a long way with the science, and just like you said, it's a lot of pressure on the meteorologist to have a warning out even several minutes before a tornado touches down.
Yeah, matter of fact, now if you issue a tornado warning 10 minutes in advance of the tornado, uh, the expectation is that wasn't enough. It needs to be even earlier. So I guess we're making big advances in that, and I think that'll continue.
One
Anyway,
more
let's get on
story,
to
John, about documenting tornadoes. I think 25, 30 years ago, a lot of these F-Zeros and F-1s wouldn't even have been observed, especially in rural areas. I remember working in Indianapolis in the 70s, and we didn't know there was a tornado south of Indianapolis by about 25 miles until I got the newspaper clippings from the local paper, the weekly paper, that said a tornado touched down in Maud and Harry's house, knocked a tree down in a chicken shed. And so this is how far we come with tornado chasing and tornado observation. So we're even picking up the F-Zeros and F-1s now that are being reported by spotters.
exactly. Let's shift over here to hurricanes and tropical weather, and we shifted from my area down to yours. And why don't you tell us what's going on with this? Is it a system? Is it not a system? What's going on down there?
Well, you'd like to blame it on a front or some sort of synoptic weather pattern, but it's just the oceans and atmosphere is all juiced up. We've had the warmest ocean temperatures so early in the season. I think by statistically it's up to 85 degrees already, and then continuing to warm. And so the tropical weather center, the hurricane center, is sort of saying, well, we got a disturbance out there, but we don't know what's causing it, and we don't know what to name it. So we'll just say that there's a lot of moisture and tropical weather moving in across South Florida. So we've already been getting since it's Monday night. I've had over 5 inches here at my place in Fort Myers, so thankfully I don't have to go down and look at the basement. There is no basement. I was watching the radar continuously yesterday, and Sarasota got pounded for about 3 hours. And this image we're looking at, reported by a local station in South Florida, has estimated as much as 10 inches of rain fell in portions of Sarasota and Bradenton and southeast of there.
Yeah, what happens to it down there? Does it it's not necessarily flash flooding. It just sort of sits on the ground, sort of more of an inundation, isn't it? Down in South Florida, sort of water just sort of sits there.
Yeah, what happened when we moved down here and bought our house, I noticed when we were driving around, everything was flat. I asked the guy what the elevation was, and he says, there's probably about a 3 inch elevation change from one place to another. It's not noticeable. So essentially everything is about 20 feet above sea level. And so the water just ponds. And that's why this was swampland thousands of years ago and probably up to hundreds of years ago. And so the water just sits there, and we're continuing to pave portions of Southwest Florida with new developments and commercial property. And so the water just sits there until it's gradually seeps in. It's very difficult to drain swampland unless you got
Right.
a sump pump or something. But this is unbelievable. The standing water. I saw a report this morning. This water could sit around for days in the Sarasota area. There's nowhere for it to go to drain to. There's no tributaries. There's no high ground, low ground. So different geography down here, and we were talking about climate change and the impact of sea level rises, but we may have Florida sinking instead of the sea level
Hmm.
rising. So very interesting discussion topics for people that are studying climate change and how it can affect the peninsula of Florida.
Yeah, like you said, the Gulf of Mexico is so warm, and one of the things that I'm seeing, I'm working on my post for tomorrow, is across the globe right now. It is so hot. It is, it really worries me personally, um, because it's not just the Gulf, it's not the Caribbean, it's not just the Atlanta. It's a good part of the globe. I saw New Zealand hit the all-time record high for the month of June yesterday. Now it was 77 degrees, and I had to think about that for a while. But actually, that's their winter. But you see it all over right now. But one of the things I'm wondering is this season, and another post I'm putting out is everybody needs to remember is that the typical first hurricane isn't until what is it, late July or early August. So, it's not likely we're even with these waters this warm is that we're going to get something, but we could get more of these plumes of moisture if we get a low out here or a front. These plumes of moisture. So along the coast here, we could be seeing more of what's going on, like in South Florida, I think. And even if it's not a named system, that could bring some moisture. And the outlook does call for some pretty wet conditions. I think my last slide shows that in that area. But have you seen? I mean, this is pretty unusual. 86, 87 degrees this early, isn't it, out in the Gulf?
Well, we've had a very warm early summer or late spring that the average temperature in the month of May was 5 degrees warmer than normal. I think for Tampa, 3 degrees warmer than normal or actually above normal. I think it was closer to 4 degrees for Fort Myers, 4 degrees above normal for the month of May. Very, very warm overnight low temperatures at 75. Normal lows around 70. So it's been warm early in South Florida, and like you noted, it's warm in a lot of places. When I first started talking about climate change at the end of my weather service career, uh, initially we were referring to it as global warming, but now we're calling all sorts of things that are going on with the atmosphere. This thing that's going on in Florida this week, uh, we may have to come up with a new name for this phenomenon, this excessive rainfall events. We were already seeing that in the early change of the century, where rainfalls were not gentle anymore; they were just angry rainfalls across the country, even up in Minneapolis area. So this whole impact of what's going on with this warming is creating an environment that's conducive to heavy rainfall events, and hopefully, prayerfully, that the hurricane system won't be destructive. We'll get a lot of tropical weather that maybe won't be impacting the coastal regions of the United States.
Yeah, Colorado State comes out with their update tomorrow. I'll put that out on my post tomorrow, and I'm sure they're looking at this here. This is the main development region. This is where most of the tropical systems develop, right in here, and you can sort of see here. This is where it is right now, and I believe this line here is the record, and this is the mean. So look at this here. This is where it usually peaks, and this is where we're at right now. So everybody's looking at that really warm temperature. So,
Well,
talk about warm temperatures. We're going to get this is a new product the Weather Service is issuing called the heat risk, and um, this is going to be up here in St. Louis. Purple is actually a level, what is that, 4, I think, which is extreme. So we are going to get 98 degrees, and the heat is going to continue for quite some time. So it's really expanding. And I grew up in St. Louis, and I certainly know that 98 degrees is not necessarily all that unusual. Um, so we'll see. But it's what is sort of interesting to me, and I talked to you on a call about this, is in May this record high dew point. That's blue here, and here's a global picture, and here's a U.S. The southern U.S. And look at Texas here. Now remember all that rain in Houston. Well, this is just what you said, is that we have this dew point, which is atmospheric moisture at the low level, a record level. And that's indicating to me that possibility of those heavy localized downpours we're going to see. So when you combine these hot temperatures and this extreme low level moisture, that is what you get. So to me, this is what stood out to me. This graphic here, this record high dew point. That It's Brian here, Brett Schmeier, I believe. Um, Incredible job with graphics, climatology graphics. I use his work a lot, and I saw this, so that stood out for me as very ominous. This record high dew point.
Remember when we were forecasting the Weather Service and we were looking for excessive rainfall events, one of the products we would look at is precipitable water, which is not only was the low level dew points, but the volume of water through the vertical profile of the atmosphere. So it's a very good tool if you're doing a short term. Well, even now the models are be able to predict maybe very accurately 5 days out a locality that may have an excessive rainfall event. And I think in the short term, the National Weather Service was outlining southern Florida as have a slight or moderate risk of excessive rainfall. This is about Saturday or Sunday, and the models were predicting as much as 15 inches of rain for southern Florida in about a 5 to 7 day period. And here we had 10 inches of rain in a 24-hour period in Sarasota. So I think as you look back on this, this was sort of an excessive rainfall event that is a short range was not very well forecasted at a national level. Regionally, they had heavy rain in the forecast, but it's hard to predict a 10-inch rainfall, a record rainfall, even 24 or 36 hours in advance.
Yeah, this is the week 2 outlook, and you can see these are the two factors I think we're looking at the rest of June is high heat over parts of the central and eastern U.S., and then along that Gulf, that moisture. And like Craig said, dew point is low level, precipitable water is the whole atmosphere. So when you're looking at that heavy rain, we're looking at the whole atmosphere. Just a couple more graphics that I put here. This is sort of a carryover from our last one. These are growing degree days. I found it interesting. This was running above normal, and growing degree days are based on a base of 50 degrees and what your average temperature is. So if it's above 50 degrees, you have a positive or an increase in growing degree days. Well, all this area had more growing degree days than normal, and that resulted in this rapid green up here. And I show these graphs a lot. So then you go to what's the next step? Well, this is corn progress in Illinois, and look how high it is here. So there's been a jump start due to these warmer temperatures, and I guess that's one aspect of climate change is there can be a positive aspect as well with a longer growing season, an earlier growing season here, and we're seeing that right here. So with all that rain and the jump start in growing degree days, we are getting initially some good crop growth here. Now, we'll see what happens here. You can sort of see how historically the crop growth sort of, this is crop condition sort of falls in summer. We'll see how that goes. And having said that, this is the North American ensemble, and this is the months of July, August, and September. And this is very worrisome to me is the fact that in this shade here, this is 90% probability of above normal temperatures, and it is showing just really terrible conditions in this region and also from the Great Lakes into the Northeast U.S. Very much above normal. And look at this brown. This is well below normal precipitation, and it sort of extends into the Midwest. That's why I think we're going to probably dry out, and we'll be talking a little bit more about drought as we go through the summer. But this area out here, boy, I tell you, this is going to be hot and dry. And I had a client call me yesterday out in that area, and he says it looks like the moon. It looks so bad. It looks like it's just desolate out there because this has been going on. And he asked me how long it was going to last. And I said, this looks like this is going to last. As a matter of fact, I looked all the way out into January, and that's going to continue. So this region of the nation right here, it looks pretty bleak as far as hot and dry and drought conditions. He was talking about should they sell their cattle, because they're not going to have enough grazing type crops for their cattle. So those are decisions that are being made due to this hot and dry weather.
Yeah, when we talk about climate change, we talk about drought, we talk about excessive rain. It says, how can you have both? And here's a classic example of that. Here we are in Florida getting 10, 12 inches of rain in a week, and portions of the country would die for this type of moisture just if we could share a portion of it. So I'm afraid that the agricultural season and the growing belt there might be a flip-flop with that wet spring they had, and they were delayed getting the crops in. All of a sudden, we had accelerated growth. Now we got maybe a 2 foot tall corn crop coming in already, and it might get stunted if we don't see a return to rainfall in the Midwest. So we'll have to see how that pays out in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, there's a concern. And one last note here. Look at all this green down here. This is what we've been talking about. And this dark green down in Central and South Florida, that's that warm, very moist air coming inland. So we could have the Southeast U.S. and Florida quite wet through the summer months. Well, that's
All
all I
right,
got,
John.
Craig.
Good talking to you, John. Have a good
Absolutely.
week, and I wish we could send some rain your way.
Okay, yeah, and stay dry. And I'll talk to you again in a couple weeks. Take care.
All right. See you then. Bye bye.